Okay, so in the Gospel of Mark, there's this incredible story. You've got two huge miracles back to back, feeding thousands of people with basically nothing, and then calming this crazy storm. But, the real story isn't just about the miracles. It's about this massive misunderstanding that happens right in the middle of it all. And what it shows us about ourselves is pretty profound. And really, this whole thing boils down to one question. What actually happens when just overwhelming compassion runs smack into something that seems completely impossible? We're about to see this whole scenario play out, not just once, but twice. All right, so let's set the scene. The story kicks off with the apostles coming back from this big mission. They've been out there teaching, healing, and they are just completely wiped out. I mean, the crowds were so intense, the text tells us they didn't even have a chance to sit down and eat. That's how drained they were.
So Jesus sees his team as exhausted, right? And he has a simple plan. He says, hey, come with me, let's go find a quiet place and just get some rest. So they hop in a boat to get away from it all. But, yeah, that's not exactly how it goes down. The crowds figure out where they're headed, and they literally run ahead on foot. So when the boat lands, a massive group is just waiting for them.
Now, you'd think they'd be pretty frustrated, right? I mean, their one chance to get away just failed. But instead, Jesus looks out at this huge crowd, and he's just moved with compassion. He sees them as being kind of lost, like sheep without a shepherd. And in that one moment, the whole plan to get some rest, it just goes right out the window. And it's this very compassion that leads us straight into the first major event of the story, a situation that's really going to challenge what everyone thinks is possible. So for the disciples, this is basically a logistics nightmare. I mean, think about it. They're out in a remote place, it's getting late in the day, and you've got thousands of people who are getting hungry. Their solution is pretty practical, really. They just say, hey, let's send everyone home so they can go find their own food. But Jesus just turns around with this simple, almost impossible command. He looks right at his overwhelmed disciples and says, no, you give them something to eat. Can you just imagine the silence after he said that? Just stunned. And their reaction? Well, it's exactly what you'd expect. Just total disbelief. I mean, the request is so out there, so impossible, that their brains immediately switch into logistics mode. And spoiler alert, the math just doesn't work. And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures their mindset. They start crunching the numbers. They're not just saying, we can't do it. They're saying, that would take more than half a year's wages. Are we really supposed to go spend all that money? And let's be really clear about the scale we're talking about here. The story counts 5,000 times men. And that number doesn't even include the women and children who were there too. So the actual crowd was probably way, way bigger than 5,000. So this is the gap they're staring across. After they check their supplies, all they can scrounge up is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. So on one hand, you have a light snack for one person. On the other, a crowd that could fill a small stadium. The whole idea is just absurd. But Jesus' approach here is incredibly simple. First, he just brings some order to the chaos. He has everyone sit down in groups. Then he takes that tiny bit of food they have, and he gives thanks for it. Then he breaks it and has the disciples start passing it out. And finally, he tells them to make sure they collect all the leftovers. And the result? It's just mind-blowing. Not only did every single person eat until they were full, but when they collected the leftovers, they filled up 12 whole baskets. I mean, they ended up with way more food than they started with. The takeaway here is huge. An impossible problem was just met with this insane, overwhelming abundance. But the story is far from over. Right after seeing this incredible display of abundance, the disciples get into a boat to cross the lake. And this is where any understanding they might have gained is about to be put to a serious test. And the scene just shifts completely. Now you've got the disciples out on the water, it's the middle of the night, and they are just straining at the oars, fighting this really strong wind. They are struggling big time. And at the same time, Jesus is up on a mountainside all by himself, praying. So the story says this is all happening shortly before dawn. We're talking about the 4th watch of the night. The darkest, coldest part. They've been rowing for hours at this point. They're totally exhausted, and they're just battling this storm. The whole atmosphere is incredibly tense. And it's right then, in that moment, that they look out across the water, and they see a figure walking towards them, on the water. Now, in their exhausted, terrified state, what's their first thought? It's a ghost. The text says they literally cried out in terror.
But then, through all the wind and the noise of the waves, a voice cuts right through their fear. It's Jesus, and he just tells them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid."
And the moment he climbs into the boat with them, the wind dies down, just like that. The storm that they had been fighting against for hours just stops. It's another seemingly impossible situation resolved in an instant.
Okay, and this brings us to the absolute core of this entire story. We've just seen two unbelievable miracles. But the real point, the real lesson, is found in how the disciples reacted to that second one, and more importantly, why they reacted that way.
So the text says they were completely amazed that the wind died down. But stop and think about that for a second. Why on earth would they be amazed? These are the exact same guys who, just a few hours ago, helped distribute food for more than 5,000 people that came from 5 loaves and 2 fish. Shouldn't this kind of thing be almost normal for them by now?
Well, the text gives us the reason, and it's summed up in this phrase: their hearts were hardened. Now, that doesn't mean they were evil or bad people. It just means they weren't connecting the dots. They couldn't let the real meaning of the first miracle sink in deep enough to change how they saw the next impossible situation. And right here is the critical connection the entire story has been building to. The text draws a direct line, saying they were amazed by the wind stopping because they had not understood the lesson of the loaves. See, they saw the feeding as just a one-off magic trick, a cool display of power. They totally missed what it was supposed to teach them about who Jesus was, that his authority wasn't just over food, but over the whole physical world.
So that leaves us with this final thought-provoking question. The feeding of the thousands wasn't really about the food, and calming the storm wasn't really about the weather. Both of these incredible events were pointing to one single massive truth about identity and about trust. So what was that one lesson? The one thing that, if they had truly understood it after the first miracle, would have meant they wouldn't have been afraid in that boat at all.